Chapter 12. Imminent Destruction Grief. Bernice trotted back into the king's chambers somewhat galvanized. She clapped her hands together to get everybody's attention. "I've just had a message from God, and he says that unless we do something really, really useful very soon, we're all going to die. Now, does anybody have any good ideas?" Silence. They were all still, unfortunately, relying on her. What panto options hadn't she explored? Her gaze floated aimlessly across the dwarves. Cute was gazing up at her in expectation. Moody was slapping one tiny fist into one tiny palm. Lazy had gone to sleep in a chair. Asleep! She turned to the king. "Why is your daughter Aurora always asleep?" The king looked as if he rather doubted that this was important, but he went along with it. "She was cursed by a witch. She pricked her finger and, unless we can find a way to wake her, is doomed to sleep for 1,000 years. Take me to her." As they ran up the stairs of a particularly isolated and gloomy tower, Wolsey patted Bernice's shoulder. "Why are you interested in this sleeping princess?" "The royalty here are the crew of the ship. If we're still on the ship, it strikes me as odd that one of the crew is permanently asleep." They came to the door of the turret room, and the king put a finger to his lips. He took a key from his belt, unlocked the door, and shepherded them in. The Princess Aurora was very beautiful, her hair flung back over her pillows, her face relaxed in sleep, but, as Bernice swiftly recognized, this was a real person, not one of those characters she'd started to think of as computer programs. Indeed, now she was this close, Bernice knew that she recognized her. Aurora was Aurum Salvistra, the ship's navigator. Her situation at that moment was very strange indeed. She lay in a huge round bed with a red bedspread. The bed was at the centre of a round tower room with, and this was appropriate for a navigator, Bernice thought, a starscape painted on the roof above. At its centre was a large red orb. But the strangest thing about the room was what was wrong with it. It had a missile sticking through the wall. There had been, of course, no sign of this sudden bit of interior decorating from outside the castle. The nose cone of the missile had gone straight through a shelf of books along one wall. Its thin, tapering nose spar had punctured right through the spine of one book, and from there led across the room to where Aurora slept. Her hand was flopped out over one side of the bed, her ring finger hanging limply. Its tip was pierced by the very end of the missile's spar, an old wound long healed. "That," purred Wolsey, "is one extraordinarily well-armed witch." Bernice went to the bookshelf and inspected the book that the missile's nose spar had burst its way through. The title, along its damaged spine, was English Pantomime, A Critical Study, by Prof. F. Archduke. Bernice put her hand on the volume, thinking about snapping the spar to get it out of both the book and the princess. But then she started to get that feeling, the Nancy Drew, Scooby-Doo feeling that had so enlivened her reading under the covers when she was a girl. She thought that she'd got the solution to this one before the author had given it away. She let go of the book and marched to the bed. "Have you ever done anything to try to make her wake up?" The king looked rather abashed. Charming offered to kiss her a couple of times, but the consensus was that, since we didn't understand the magic involved, it was best not to interfere. "I see," Bernice nodded. "Oh well then, here goes nothing." Before anybody could stop her, she took Aurora's finger and gently plucked it from the end of the missile. The princess gave a sudden deep breath. "She's beautiful," exclaimed Cute. Do you have to do that? Bernice asked him. I can't help it, said the dwarf. The Princess Aurora tossed her head as if waking from a nightmare, and then opened her eyes. My beloved daughter, cried the king, and embraced her. But the navigator's wide eyes fixed on something terrible past her father's shoulder. The red sphere at the centre of her ceiling mural. She pointed at it and screamed at the top of her voice. What is it? Asked Bernice, taking her by the shoulders. What's wrong? I don't know. Just a bad dream. Something... The woman looked around, blinking, as if adjusting to the life she'd found in the waking world. Something magical. Bernice restrained herself from slapping her. Red Giant! She shouted at the struggling princess. Navigator! Winton! Concentrate! The matrix of pantomime, all the beliefs and expectations of this world, seemed to be weakest at the edges of sleep. This life was indeed a dream. Maybe all life was. Whatever. Bernice wasn't going to lose the insight the navigator had had when she first woke. She stared right into Bernice's eyes, as if looking at any of the others in the room would make her lose the thought, and she said, The star, Perfecton star, that size on my screens. She's going to go supernova. We have hours. Less. Bernice let her go, and she collapsed into the arms of the man she would now think of as her father. He glared at Bernice. What did that mean? Why were you so rough with her? Because all of us, that Perfecton army included, are running out of time. Can we get PNN in here? The king gently eased Aurora into the arms of Candy and went to a brass plate mounted on the wall beside the bed. He waved a hand. The plate swam into life. The view it showed made Bernice hold back a little shriek of panic. It was a close-up of the marching line at the front of the enemy army. A row of literally thousands of Perfectons, male and female, stretching as far as the eye could see. At their head, the genie floating beside him, strode the individual that Bernice had examined in the front row of the audience, his headdress larger than all the others. He carried the lamp before him. It was obvious now that it was glowing with energy. Bernice nodded to herself. Vizier, with your magic? So I'm more than just a simple whatever it was now, am I? Moaned the magician. A computer program. But quite a sweet one. As long as you don't try to kiss me again. Go on. I'm all ears. Bernice looked determined. You're going to kaboom me from here to right in front of that big bugger with the lamp. Us too? Cried the dwarves Candy and Woolsey. Bernice sighed and caught the eye of her cat. He was looking like he looked on a wet morning when he'd just come home, that same lost mixture of sadness and anger. Just Wools, she said. Indeed, Woolsey drew his sword. Come on, then, said the vizier. He looked around, as if struck by a sudden thought. Yeah, anybody got any chalk? Bernice and Woolsey stood at the edge of a chalk pentagram drawn by the vizier on the floor of his dungeon. Now, once I start my incantations, don't step over the lines, or you'll lose your extremities, he told them, straightening up. When you want to come back, just say the magic words, Open Sesame. They stepped inside. Woolsey looked at Bernice seriously. Do you know exactly what your objective is? Well, sort of, she grinned. I am, to a degree, improvising, but I'm really after two things. One, I want that lamp back. Two, I'd really like to compare notes with that big Perfecton about just what's going on here. You're going to chat, to the vanguard of an invading army. Bernice gently punched his arm. Ah, but I have an absolutely guaranteed panto-related trick worked out. It can't fail. Wolsey was silent for a moment. What do you want the lamp for? Because if I put it on the plinth, I think... Oh, Wolsey, finish your sentence. You think that doing that will bring this life to an end and take us all back to where we came from, that it'll transform us into our previous selves. Yes, said Bernice, unable to meet his gaze. I don't know why, but yes. Wolsey nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. I won't use it, not unless don't be so foolish. He reached out and gently touched her chin with the pad of his paw. The first time he'd touched her, Bernice realized, since his transformation. Let us see the way the world goes, and act accordingly. Bernice took a deep breath, took the paw in her hand, and turned to the vizier. Go on then, she told him. Carry on spellcasting. The vizier cleared his throat. Pilau alu sang. The greater one surveyed the land before him, and shook his head in disgust. He turned to one of the others of his race, who marched beside him, and expressed, as he had several times that day, his general satisfaction. It is astonishing! Where has this land come from? Who are these individuals? I would understand if there was simply chaos, if there had been decay in the program, but why has it become like this? This state will not persist, said his lieutenant purposefully. Correct, buzzed the genie floating beside them. I will correct all anomalies and bring the program back under our control. I will find the underlying code and shape it back into our plan. I will destroy all anomalous beings. Good to know, said the Greater One. Continue with that. The army, or rather the entire species, that followed the Greater One had covered a great deal of ground through this anomalous mass of programming, and were finally approaching what appeared to be the centre, a structure with turrets and a large gateway. Perhaps the solution to the Greater One's problem would be there. He certainly hoped so. The current situation was baffling, not one of the many possibilities he had envisaged when implementing this project. The line of marching figures passed, one by one, and rather awkwardly over a stile that led into a small meadow. The genie offered to erase the feature, but the Greater One enjoyed the feeling of exercising his muscles. It was the only thing that kept him certain that this was not all a dream. As the 328th of the 3 billion or so was climbing over the stile, the Greater One's lieutenant indicated that he should observe something that was happening in the centre of the meadow. A purple cloud of smoke had appeared, and out of it wandered two figures, coughing and waving smoke away with their hands. I will, began the genie. Wait, the Greater One raised a hand. Let's try to learn something at least. Let me have a quick word, see what they know. Then you can erase them. Bernice stared at the vanguard of the vast army that had so far hopped over the stile into the meadow. The one with the lamp is looking at me in a funny way, she murmured. Well, 3 billion's a crowd, purred Wolsey. If you don't want me to play gooseberry, just ask. Woman and cat looked at each other, then girded their loins and stepped forward. We come in peace, declared Bernice, raising both her hands. Wolsey quickly sheathed his sword. I do wish you'd told me you were going to do that. As I said, Bernice whispered, as the larger Perfecton stepped forward. "I'm making this up as I go along." "You speak our language," chuckled the Perfecton leader as he approached. "How charming. Doubtless a function of our existence here." "Doubtless," agreed Bernice, a little disturbed by the fruity and jovial English accent that the large alien had turned out to have. She'd expected to have to cross cultural barriers slowly at this point, delay the army by a lengthy process of translation and diplomacy. It sounded like this chap was ready to wave aside her objections and devastate anything he wanted to devastate, which meant that she'd probably have to play her exceedingly dodgy trick. "So," she waved her arms vaguely, "tell me about this army of yours. Who are they? Where do they come from?" The large alien puffed his oddly shaped chest out proudly. "We are us." Bernice thanked goodness that Hetty and Lucinda weren't there, and adopted her best interested listener pose, aware that, moment by moment, the meadow was filling up with impatient and very well-armed Perfectons. "Hello, us. And who are you?" "Is he one of us, or is he one of them?" murmured Wolsey, who had obviously not entirely rid himself of the habits of Panto. "I am the greater one," sniffed the large alien, "the leader of my species. We once enjoyed a technologically advanced, perfect civilization, having achieved powers which lesser races such as yours would describe as godlike. We elected not to pursue the physics of interstellar travel, but instead made ours the best of all possible worlds. Then we realized that, with cruel irony, in a scant few decades, our planet would become uninhabitable owing to changes in our sun." A number of the other Perfectons were nodding along, sighing and looking sad. "So," Bernice couldn't resist trying her own theory for size, "you preserved your entire culture as a computer matrix and downloaded all your secrets, technology, and finally good selves into a single missile." The greater one looked rather put out. "Yes, got it in one." The missile was programmed to launch itself at any suitable spaceship that came near to your planet. Through the power of quantum particle fluctuations, eh? Asked Wolsey. "Magic," Bernice whispered. She addressed the greater one once more. "Through them, you planned to reactualize that ship into a vessel for the whole Perfecton culture. A vessel that would actually be bigger on the inside than the outside." She stopped and glanced at Wolsey, as if to make sure that everything was okay. He nodded impatiently. "I think you got away with it. Go on." She did. "A vessel that would carry your entire world and people. The original crew would become Perfectons. Would become us. And everything about the ship would become a thing of your world. That ship would be free to take your race out into the universe, leaving your dying star to expire." The greater one inclined his head in a shallow bow. "You are correct in all respects. Is it not a majestic plan?" "Well, it would be," Benny smiled, "if it hadn't been royally buggered up. That missile hit our ship many, many centuries after the automatic systems you left to launch it were supposed to have been activated. Through what seems to me to be a 1,000,000,000 chance, it hit smack dab in the middle of our computer mainframe. Actually pierced it. The quantum particle fluctuation warhead activated, but instead of accessing the databanks you'd stored in the rest of the missile, it used as its source material my colleague Professor Archduke's thesis, English Pantomime, a Critical Study. Hence all this." She gestured around her. "Until I popped down into those caves and the Grell rubbed the lamp, thus breaking the panto ambience decisively, the only role in the pantomime for you lot was as the audience." Her smile slowly faded as she realized that there was a whole area of this experience that her theory utterly failed to explain. But that doesn't explain why. The Greater One slapped himself on the forehead and turned to his people, his arms spread wide. Why, of course. This makes so much sense. We're living in the wrong world. Bernice and Wolsey laughed along with him. So there's something we can do to work this out, right? Benny asked. Oh, of course, the Greater One grinned. Our master program here, storehouse of all our technological knowledge, and sprite for running the quantum particle fluctuations, who now rather wonderfully looks like a... What does he look like? A genie, said Wolsey. Who now looks like a genie, will move through this invalid data and delete it all. We'll take this world by force and transform your ship into what we wanted in the first place. Thank you so much for clearing up those few little queries for us. Ah, Bernice said, and oh, and well... Wolsey put a hand on her shoulder. I rather think that it's time for that party piece you mentioned. Bernice calmed herself. I think you're right. She looked up at the towering ethereal presence of the genie and took a deep breath. Oi, genie! The genie looked down at her. Yes? You think you're very powerful, correct? Yes. More powerful than the fairy godfather, who I'm certain was the personification of the central computer access sprite on my shipboard lectern? More powerful than the Wicked Queen and the Rat King, other programs on the ship's computer? Yes. More powerful even than the ship's mainframe itself, the intelligence that, in the world of Panto, became the giant? Yes. Bernice snorted. Rubbish! I thoroughly disagree. You can't be such a powerful genie, because there's one particular feat that you're completely incapable of doing. Oh, no, there isn't, said the genie. A slow grin spread across Bernice's face. Oh, yes, there is. Oh, no, there isn't. Oh, yes, there is. This continued for some time, until the genie looked ready to explode, and many of the perfectons were tapping their feet and looking at their metaphorical watches. Oh, no, there isn't, he bellowed. The Greater One raised a finger. Let me settle this. What is this feat of which you speak? Simple, Bernice said. It's easy to spout out of a lamp like that, but it's incredibly hard to get back in. I don't believe he can do it. Do you seriously expect, began the Greater One. Just a second too late, because in that time the genie had roared, reduced itself to a speck, and vanished back into the lamp. This Panto business, as Bernice had realized, was really rather catching. Wolsey leapt forward and grabbed it off the Greater One. Holding the lid on tight, he rolled back to Bernice and yelled, I've got it. Say the magic words. Bernice blinked very slowly. The magic words? Yes, the magic words that will get us back to the castle. Why don't you say them? Because I've forgotten them. Bernice felt a horror rising in her stomach and clenched her buttocks very tightly. Oh, sod! So have I. The large and messy click of over 1,000 safety catches being released echoed across the meadow. Give us back the lamp, said the Greater One, and we will let you live a little longer than anybody else. Try to think of the magic words, Wolsey puffed. Bernice closed her eyes, half to help her think, half in anticipation of being horribly shot. She reached inside her mind, trying to remember all those absolute memory tricks that Professor Late had taught her. Blank. She breathed deeply and slowly, searching for her hidden depths. She realized that there was a lumpy thing in her jerkin pocket. She put her hand on it, slipped her finger into it, and opened her eyes, smiling. She swung the finger with the green gem on it into the Greater One's line of sight. "Aha!" she said. "You didn't bet on me having this, did you?" The Greater One adopted the tone of voice one uses to address infants who've brought home half a bat. "No. What is it?" "It's a ring, which does all sorts of dangerous things." Bernice wondered if laughter meant the same thing for perfectons as it did for humans. She hoped not. "It can summon a powerful genie of my own." "Really?" said the Greater One. "Then show us." Bernice glared at him and rubbed the gem. She was really only killing time, hoping that the magic words would pop into her head or that Wolsey would remember them. So she was quite surprised when there was a burst of flame in front of her. Between her and Wolsey and the mass of the Perfecton army appeared Menlove Stokes.